Hi, my name's Penny, and as usual, I'm here to talk about some bookish things. Specifically, today what I wanted to do was give you some random book recommendations. So last month, to create my June TBR, I made this website called the TBR Machine, which basically spits out random reading prompts. And I was thinking about how else I could use this in a fun way, and I thought, why not just let it spit out a random reading prompt, and I will recommend a book to you for that reading prompt. I'm not sure how many prompts I'm going to do. Maybe 10. 10's a nice round number. Let's recommend 10 books. So the first reading prompt that the TBR Machine has come up with is to read the shortest book on your TBR. So let me try and come up with a short book that I think you should read. Okay, so I was going to try just to do one book per prompt, but I came up with too many good ones. So firstly, a really good option for shortest books is to read some graphic novels. I do have here I Hate Fairyland Volume 3. I would recommend the I Hate Fairyland series, although if I'm recommending graphic novels, I do recommend the Lock and Key series as well. That is definitely one of my favorites. It's really dark and creepy, and it's in this world where there are these magical keys that give the user different magical abilities. I Hate Fairyland is about this girl who gets sucked through to fairyland, absolutely hates it, sucks at completing the quest to get back to the real world, and gets stuck in a childlike body for 30 years in fairyland, and she just destroys everything. Both really great, but if you want an actual proper book and not just a graphic novel, then I would recommend either the Wayward Children series. Those books are pretty much novellas. They're very short. So you've got Every Heart a Doy is the first book, and then there's another 3 books out after that since then. The second and the fourth books are actually my favorite, but I did like the first one. It tells the story of these children who've gone through portals to magical worlds, and now they're stuck back on Earth. They're really upset about it because they felt really at home in these magical worlds, and so they're all living in this halfway house where they can commiserate and understand each other as they struggle getting used to the normal world again. Another one I would recommend would be Shadows for Silence in the Forests of Hell, which I think is a short story or a novella by Brandon Sanderson. So Brandon Sanderson normally writes these really epic fantasies that are ridiculously long and really hard to commit to. But this is a very standalone story, so I think it gives you a feeling for his unique magic systems and his writing style without committing to those really massive chunkers. So that would be another good recommendation. If I keep recommending so many books though, this is going to take a long time. Let's try another one. So the next prompt is to read a book with purple on the cover. Maybe I'll just recommend one book this time because that's very hard to search for on Goodreads. But I can think of one that I would recommend off the top of my head, although maybe it's cheating because I think it's the third book in a series. This is Rapture by Cameron Hurley, the third book in the Beldame Apocrypha series, where we follow this woman named Nyx. She's kind of a screw up. I love how self-destructive she is. She is a headhunter. She goes out basically trying to kill criminals and get a bounty for killing them. She always gets all involved in all these political conspiracies and dramas, and it's just really great. And also she has this crew that she works with, and there's this really cool dynamic with all of them. Like, again, very destructive dynamic, definitely not healthy, but it's really interesting. I really feel like I should come up with one where it isn't the third book in a series. Okay, I thought of 2. So one is Skyward by Brandon Sanderson, since I'm recommending Brandon Sanderson books. This is a science fiction story about this girl named Spencer whose father died in an act of cowardice as part of the war, and now she is trying to overcome that reputation. This is also on a planet where they are trapped on the planet because these aliens won't let them leave, and so they regularly battle with these aliens in these cool airships, planes, spaceships, I don't know, but they're cool. And again, because it's YA science fiction and it's the first book in a series, it is very isolated from the rest of his books. It's quite short and easy to read, so it's a way to get into Brandon Sanderson without dealing with those really intimidating epic fantasies. Another one I might suggest would be The Forgetting by Sharon Cameron. So this is another YA fantasy. It's set in this dystopian world where every 12 years, I think, or maybe less, I think every 12 years, people completely forget everything. They have to start their lives again. They do carry around these notebooks where they make all sorts of notes about their lives so that they can read them again after they've forgotten everything. But it does open the society up to corruption because people can write down anything. And so when they wake up with all their memories gone and read something that isn't true, how do they know? They're just going to think it's true. So it is quite interesting from that perspective. Okay, another prompt. The TBR Machine suggests that we read a debut novel. So what are some debut novels that I recommend? So I do on the TBR Machine include some recommendations on some pages. I haven't quite got to putting them on all the pages because it's a lot of work, and is it actually a valuable use of my time? I don't know, probably not. But one book I do have on there that I think is a good recommendation is The Time Traveler's Wife by Audrey Niffenegger. So this is a story about this guy who has no control over it. Every now and then he wakes up to find himself in a different time. Often in times of stress, he will suddenly transport to a different time. And he ends up building up this relationship with this young girl. Initially, he meets her and at a certain point he tells her, oh yeah, by the way, in the future we're going to get married. It is a very emotional book because there are some dramas that happen because of his time traveling, and it's really interesting because it's told from both their perspectives, but obviously he experiences their relationship in a very different way than her because they experience events chronologically different. Definitely recommend reading this book. It's kind of like a contemporary with fantastical elements. So I guess in some way it's a magical realism, which is interesting because time travel stuff is normally more science fiction. So it's kind of got all these different genres mixed in together. So the next prompt TBR Machine has given us is to read a contemporary book. This is somewhat of a problem because I don't really like contemporary. I could have just used The Time Traveler's Wife for this as well. Actually, no, I know what I'm going to give you. I really recommend Big Little Lies. It is in some ways, I guess, a bit of a thriller, so I'm not sure if everyone would count it as contemporary, but it does deal with a lot of contemporary issues. It deals with bullying and domestic violence. We basically follow these three mothers, I think primarily, whose kids all go to the same school. They're all struggling with different issues, and also right at the beginning the book tells you that on the specific night someone is going to die, and so you know that you're building up towards someone dying and you're trying to work out who is it going to be. But I found myself getting really attached to all the women in this book, and I thought the level of suspense and anticipation working up to that death were just right, and the ending was so satisfying. I definitely recommend this one. I guess if I was going to recommend another contemporary, looking through my rated list, I would recommend The Seven Husbands of Evelyn Hugo, but I feel like I don't need to recommend that because everybody's heard about that book, right? We follow this Hollywood starlet who has had 7 husbands, and she is doing this interview about her life story and telling us about each of her husbands and revealing who it was that she really loved. There's also this interaction between her and the interviewer that adds to the story. It's a really interesting story. I did listen to the audiobook, and I do think I would have struggled to get through the physical book, but that's primarily because contemporary is not my genre, and it tends to get a little bit boring when I read it because I just want to know, where's the magic? Almost every contemporary could be improved with the addition of a little bit of magic, in my opinion. Or like technology that's so cool that it's the equivalent of magic. But I know some of you like contemporary without magic. I don't know why, but some of you do. So the next prompt the TBR Machine has come up with is to read the longest book on your TBR. So I guess I will come up with some long books to recommend you, but I do think most people aren't willing to go into a long book unless they've got a really good justification to themselves as to why they want to read it. So I'm not sure if it's worth it, but I'll give you some. So the first book I'm going to recommend is The Power of One. I actually only own Tandia, which is the sequel, which I do also recommend. The Power of One follows this young boy right from when he's young through to when he's much older, and he is growing up in South Africa, deals quite heavily with themes of racism. He also becomes a boxer, and there's a lot of violent, horrible stuff that happens, but it's so heartfelt. It just hits you right there. Same with Tandia. Tandia follows this African woman, half Indian, half African, and kind of follows her story and how she ends up getting involved with PK. It's funny that I'm recommending this after just saying that I think books are much better with magic, and these don't have magic, but they're kind of magical in that they're so good at expressing the human experience. And I was kind of trying to avoid recommending those big chunky epic fantasies, because I feel like if that's not something you're into, you're just not going to be interested because it's going to be way too scary. And if it is something you're interested in, then you've probably read most of the ones that I've read. I mean, obviously I would recommend the Mistborn trilogy by Brandon Sanderson, Elantris by Brandon Sanderson, the Stormlight Archive books by Brandon Sanderson. Even though I've only started that series, I would recommend all those books, but you have to love complex magic systems, and you have to love massive world building to really get into any of those books. And I think if you love those things, you've probably already got plans to pick up Brandon Sanderson, or at least I hope you do. So let me recommend a couple of other really long books. The first would be American Gods by Neil Gaiman. So this follows a guy named Shadow who has been stuck in prison. Unfortunately, once he gets out of prison, he discovers his wife is dead, and he gets involved with all this craziness. He gets involved with working for this man named Mr. Wednesday, who has all sorts of really weird acquaintances. Things get very strange. It's Neil Gaiman, that's what he does. But it is really interesting, and I do recommend it. And another long book that I would recommend would be King's Dragon by Kate Elliott. This is the first book in a 7-book series. I've only read this first one, but I still would recommend it at this point. In some ways, it's very similar to Game of Thrones in that you are following a bunch of different characters as these different people are fighting over the throne, but there's also dark magic and elves, and although it says King's Dragon, I don't think there's dragons, or at least in the first book there wasn't dragons. But it does have a very similar vibe in some ways, except maybe it's slightly less violent. There is still a little bit of violence. I probably should wait before I read more of this series before I really recommend this book, but I would like more people to read this so that I can talk to them about it. So please consider being that person. So the next prompt the TBR Machine has come up with is to read a book with a person on the cover. Let's see what we can find. Okay, first I want to recommend a couple of really obvious ones. The first is Vicious by V.E. Schwab. We have a person on the cover here. I believe it's Victor, but it could be Eli. I'm not sure, but this follows these guys who in college are investigating extraordinaries, who are people who have developed extraordinary abilities. The story is told in 2 timelines though, so while they're investigating these extraordinaries, they're also in the future where Victor has just got out of prison and he is on his way to kill Eli. This is definitely one of my favorite stories, so I do recommend it. Another one is my favorite series, which is the Kate Daniels series. Every book has Kate on the front, along with Curran, the lion, who is a shapeshifter, in fact, head of the shapeshifters. Now, I know urban fantasies with shapeshifters and vampires are often a little bit cliche and probably considered to be not relevant anymore, but I think the Kate Daniels series puts a really unique spin on it, especially it's set in this dystopian Atlanta where magic is starting to come back, but it comes back in waves. So when magic's working, technology isn't, and when technology is working, magic isn't, but it switches back with no real warning. So it's really interesting seeing how that affects the world, and that technology is no longer really reliable, but magic is such an unknown quality as well. And this series is complete, so you can read it and you won't even have to wait. Then I also want to recommend one that I don't have, but I do want to buy myself a copy because I do really like this book, and that is The Girl with All the Gifts by M.R. Carey. So this is really hard to say what it's about because it's kind of spoilers, but dystopian future. It starts out with this young girl. She's stuck in this cell. These guards come, point guns at her, and they force her to get into this wheelchair. They strap her down, and then they wheel her into a classroom where there's a whole bunch of other children in exactly the same situation. what's going on. It's really great, really dark, but it also has such a great analysis of human behavior that I just really enjoyed it, and I really do recommend it. So I didn't really count, but I think that was 5 or 6 prompts, and I do think that's enough recommendations for today. Do let me know if you've read any of those books. Do you agree that they are worth recommending? Or if you are now interested in reading any of those books, I would love to know that as well. Otherwise, thank you so much for watching. I hope that you are having a wonderful day, and I will see you again next time.